And she connected us with Officer Leo Harris, who is here today. And I just want to, let's give him a round of applause because really appreciate the quick response. And he, I think, believe this actually is his day off. So thank you again. Yeah. So we have Officer Leo Harris of the Portland Police Bureau here. And he is part of the training division and wellness program, and also the CERT. So I think he has a lot of experience that he can share with us. But anyway, thank you again, Officer Harris, for coming. And so we're going to have the presentation, and he'll explain the length of it, and hopefully you will get some information that's useful to you, and we will move forward with it. And again, there's refreshments in the Cambric Parlor, so if you feel like you need to get up and go get something and come back, that's fine. And take it away, Officer Harris.
Thank you very much. David wanted me to use a microphone. This one? Yeah. That's out. I move around too much to leave it in one spot. Thank you all for having me. And obviously, Officer Natasha Hansberger is here also from the Portland Police Bureau. Thank you for the introduction, Judy. I appreciate it. One of the things that we're going to talk about quite a bit is the need to have support from the management in order to even have these conversations and figure out what type of response you might have. So that'll definitely be a part of the conversation. So you're ahead of the curve. There's a lot of people that either haven't talked about it or don't want to talk about it. And so I appreciate you all being here today to talk about a topic that is not easy to talk about. And so we're going to obviously be careful how we talk about it. We're going to be very respectful. Our goal here is to give you some information and answer a lot of questions and provide some perspective. Our goal is not to scare anybody into like taking some action. Thankfully, your chances of being involved in an incident like we're going to talk about are very low. One of the things we do hope is that you take away from today a mindset that you can take with you everywhere. So we'll get more into that. As Judy said, my name is Leo Harris, and I've been a police officer here in the city of Portland for 20 years. And it's gone by very quickly until the last couple. I'm also on our SWAT team, and I've been doing that for 14 years. So I have been to quite a few of the more difficult and dangerous situations. And that has also led me to respond to the Clackamas Town Center, which was an active shooter situation in Clackamas. The Reynolds High School active shooter, which is over in Fairview. And then also to the Park Rose High School that we thought was an active shooter, treated it as such. Thankfully, a teacher was able to tackle the person, take him into custody, and it didn't end up being an active shooter. But I've been to 3 situations that we thought were active shooter situations. And I have taught the entire police bureau multiple times. In my former job, before I got the wellness job, I was in the patrol tactics discipline in our training division. And so what we did was teach police officers how to respond to an active shooter. And that is also how we ended up building a community active shooter response program. Initially, when people started asking us for this information, we told them no. Like, I didn't feel qualified to do it. It's a totally different topic talking to you all about what you would do in a situation like that versus people that were paying to be at work. We're giving them body armor, we're giving them firearms, we're giving them training, and then they are going to go respond to it. So we did not feel like the experts in what the community should do, but we have done a lot of research, and I know that a lot of times the community feels better hearing about it from police officers. We've been to several, we train our police officers to go to it, but one of the things I would ask you all, if we're missing something or if you think that there's something that we're not covering, feel free to tell us. Because we're always looking for feedback, we're always looking for information that would make our program better. And there might be people in this room that have more experience than I do. I don't know. So we're always looking for feedback, we're always looking for questions throughout this whole thing. Please stop me and ask questions if it's relevant to what we're talking about right away. And people are good about that. A lot of times at the end, for question and answers, there usually aren't any, because we've done it throughout the whole presentation. It usually takes about an hour and a half. And so probably halfway through, we'll take a break, use the restroom, get some refreshments, and come back. Like I said, there's not going to be anything in this that is like gory. I think there's one picture that has some blood when we talk about like helping injured people. But this is not something that's meant to like gross anybody out or scare anybody. Does anybody have any questions before we get started? All right. If you will, there's 2 handouts that I gave you. There's one from, I think it's the New York Times, Washington Post. That's one of the more succinct, good overviews of everything we're going to talk about. So in a couple months or a couple years, if you've forgotten and we haven't been back, that's a great thing for you all to remind yourself, whether you're on the safety committee or not. It'd probably be a great thing for the safety committee to go over. The other one that's from us, it's the Portland Police Bureau handout. That covers a lot of the things that are going to be up on the slide. So don't feel like you have to write down everything, but it is a good place to take notes. If you want to keep that handout, I would. Make some notes on it, and then for your meetings, or if you're going to do trainings, have that handy, and hopefully your notes will be on there with anything that we talked about today, questions you got answered, etc. The first thing we'll start with is a definition. I think it's important to all be on the same page and understand what we're talking about. And when people use the term active shooter, I think most people assume that it's somebody with a gun shooting people. For the police response, we had to make it an even more specific definition, and that is an armed person who has used deadly physical force on other people. They continue to do so, and they have unrestricted access to more people. And for the police, that's a very important definition, because we don't want our police officers using an active shooter response to anything that's not an active shooter. And we unfortunately go to a lot of situations where somebody has used deadly force, but there aren't additional victims, and they're not continuing to use deadly force. So you wouldn't want the police barging in there. Like I said, I'm on our SWAT team. We also go with negotiators. And the majority of times, we're able to peacefully resolve situations, even if there's been a homicide, by surrounding the person, not letting them either leave in a car or a structure, and then our negotiators talk to them. That's how we resolve most of the situations that we're in. And so we wouldn't want police using an active shooter response. And the active shooter response is going to be coming in as quickly as possible. Coming in through doors that you may have to break open, coming in through windows, whatever it might take. And so the active shooter response is the only one where you have police officers without necessarily supervision or being directed to do things, acting on their own. And we have done a lot of scenarios. We've done a lot of training with the Fire Bureau and with other agencies around here. And there are some very large structures, schools, hospitals, where we have had officers into every room within 5 minutes during some of the trainings. And as you're going to see from some of the stuff we're going to talk about, some of the statistics, that sense of urgency and how quickly we can get in and stop something from happening is really key in these types of instances. So they are going to be coming. I know that there have been probably a lot of questions in the last couple weeks, especially from Texas, about whether the police are going to go in, whether the police should have gone in. And there might be situations that we have trained for where if somebody came in and used deadly force on someone, maybe at a workplace, and then took some hostages, and then they're making demands, maybe they're on the phone with the police, an incident might transition from an active shooter to something where there is a hostage situation. And we would want the officers to not use their active shooter response. Depending on how difficult it is to get in and depending on what the situation is, it might be safer for everyone inside to try to negotiate with this person. Officers have been trained in this area for sure that if it's an ongoing active shooter or if it transitions from a hostage situation to an active shooter, to go in immediately. I have no doubt that our officers will be working to get in immediately and try to save people. So I don't know if there's questions about the Texas situation. I don't know if there's thoughts that are lingering in people's minds about would the police do the right thing? Did they do the right thing down there? I don't know if they did the right thing down there. Obviously, it was horrible and tragic. What I can tell you from having responded to 3 active shooter responses, the police in each of those situations went in immediately. There was no question. In some cases, the response had the desired effect and helped stop other people from getting hurt. even if the police didn't actually take action. The perpetrator actually saw the police coming and took their own life in a couple of those instances, which is sad, but still preferable to anybody else getting injured. Are there any questions about the definition and why we need all three of those parts if the police are going to come just barging in? Go ahead.
This is not necessarily about the definition, but I see in here usually incidents could be over within 12 minutes. Knowing where we are here in Northeast Portland, on a Sunday we're in here, you know, what is your guesstimate of how quick a response could be to here?
Great question. How quick would a response be to here was the question. I think it would be very quick. I mean, obviously you're not super far away from a precinct. One of the things I can say is you would have officers coming from the whole city. And unless they were on a life-threatening situation right then, they would drop what they were doing and they would come immediately. Most of these real-life active shooter incidents locally have had in the neighborhood of 200 to 300 officers there. I mean, they've come from Southwest Washington and Tigard and Tualatin, and we would probably do the same. We've actually had to implement training on what to do with too many police officers, because you can imagine having too many resources can also be a problem, trying to manage that, especially if you have people on different nets and all those different things. So that's a great question. I do think there would be people here well within 5 minutes. And one of the things to think about the police response, it's not like they're all going to show up somewhere and then come in together. If you have one officer show up, if Natasha and I showed up here, we would come right in without waiting for anybody else. And so you would just have an ongoing wave of more and more resources coming. It would depend, obviously, on how far away they were. There are definitely places throughout the city where there's just less officers. And there's obviously places in the city that are really far away from where officers hang out a lot. But I think in this exact location, you would get a pretty quick response. Yep. Can't see the percentages there. Some of these percentages are starting to get a year or two old, but they still have held true. They've gone up and down a little bit, but wanted to talk about just some of the facts to give you some perspective. So a little bit under 4% of the incidents overall from 2000 to 2013 were in a house of worship. 98% of the time it was one person acting alone. And that's a good thing. It's obviously much more challenging for you all and more challenging for the police responding if there's two people working together. Thankfully, those have been very rare. The bottom two bullet points are why we're here talking today, because the whole response for people in general can't be just wait for the police to come. And that's unfortunate. This is one of the only times where we need people to take action on their own to keep themselves safe. Almost 70% of them last less than 5 minutes. Does that surprise anybody? That's pretty quick. 60% of them are over before the police arrive. And there's a lot of different reasons for that. If somebody decides to commit an act or an incident like this, a lot of times they have a plan and they have a way or a thing that they want to accomplish. And a lot of times as soon as somebody, whether it's community members, the police, take any kind of action, they will then either a lot of times commit suicide, give up, or try to flee. And so a lot of times they know the police are coming quickly. There's almost nobody left in the US that doesn't know the police are coming quickly. You know, even in Texas, even if it turns out that they didn't do a great job, they still showed up there and started to do things. And the people know that a lot of times who are going to commit these types of incidents. So they do end very quickly, and that's why we're going to talk about today giving you information on what you can do to keep yourself safe. A few more facts. 77% of these people spend a week or longer planning. And obviously the more they plan, the worse it is for everyone, right? It makes it harder as a first responder, and it makes it harder on the people that are at whatever location the incident happens at. The benefit to them planning for a long time, can anybody think of any benefits? Go ahead. Talk themselves out of it, absolutely, because there are probably people that have thought about doing it that haven't. Go ahead.
They talk to others.
Yes, exactly. They talk to others. If you're planning on doing something like this, the odds are, and we're going to talk about some of the other risk factors, somebody else might be able to get an idea, oh, Leo's going off the rails. He's doing some pretty dangerous stuff that we think is really causing us some concern, and we can get the authorities involved. So you're exactly right. On the average, they display 4 to 5 concerning behaviors. We're going to talk about what some of those look like. And in about 40% of the cases, the police, the FBI, some kind of authority has investigated this person and checked into their behavior. And I know there have been a lot of even high-profile incidents where the police or the FBI did look into someone and then were not able to take action or weren't able to commit them to a hospital or arrest them, and they were out doing their stuff, and then later an incident did happen with that person. So that might feel like a failure. It might feel like law enforcement in general didn't do what they needed to do to keep people safe. And it is a really challenging situation for police. I know that I've been involved in several risk assessments for people where we felt really concerned that they were going to do something, and legally we had no authority to take them into custody, put them in a hospital or in jail, and sometimes not even the authority to take their weapons. So it can definitely be a challenge trying to walk that line of protecting and preserving people's rights and obviously keeping people safe. So I do want people to know we take it very seriously. We do have a very good threat assessment team, and the people in the police bureau and the surrounding agencies really stress about making sure that people are safe. And it's really challenging to leave someone that you think might be a threat down the road. So know that we think about it, know that we care about it. The other thing that is super challenging is we'll never know how many incidents we were able to stop because someone in the community provided information. We either got wraparound services or law enforcement involved. It's easy to quantify how many active shooter incidents we've had, and it's really challenging to figure out any of the ones that might have happened that we stopped because of the action we took. So I do want to talk next about things that you might see that might be concerning, that you should take action and call the police, talk to your security team, who then might talk to the police. This is a list of things, and it's by no means exhaustive, but these are some of the most common. Somebody that's a grievance collector, and maybe, you know, every Sunday Leo comes to church and he's super upset, and he's always talking about how some group or entity screwed him over. And it's always everybody else's fault. Maybe I'm super angry all the time. And then you add that to any of these other things where I'm talking about weapons all the time, talking about past incidents, you know, in a way that is concerning. It's not like, oh, that was horrible. It was something like I'm acting like it was something that was good. Major life stresses combined with this, you know, some people have had a divorce, a bankruptcy, all sorts of life things that are really challenging, but you combine it with these, right? It's unfortunate, but lots of people have had life stresses. Lots of people have been divorced or had financial issues, but it doesn't get combined with, you know, super focused on weapons, talking about past violent incidents, you know, always angry, always frustrated with everybody else, always feeling like, oh, Leo's gonna snap and be a problem. If that is all added together, that's when we want you talking to your safety team, talking to the police, and having somebody reach out and try to get wraparound services for whoever this person is to try to keep something bad from happening. Are there any questions about that? Okay. I want to talk just a little bit about the path to violence. And the reason that we're focusing on the path to violence is because that is our best opportunity to stop an event from happening. And most likely it's going to be you all noticing one of these things and reporting it and having somebody intervene ahead of time. The first one is a grievance. Obviously, although we're in church and it is Sunday, it might be hard to find somebody in here without a grievance of some kind, right? But obviously we don't keep on going down this list. So a grievance all by itself, you know, is not a super, super high risk factor. But usually it starts with a grievance. Somebody that would do one of these incidents feels like somebody or something did something to them that was unfair. Then they have some kind of idea about actually using violence. And this is where most people who have a grievance, thankfully, don't progress into this part even, right? Even if they say something stupid, you know, if I do something and somebody's like, I'm going to punch you in the nose if you say that again, that's not necessarily what we're talking about, right? Research and planning is a lot of times the next thing they go into. Sometimes this phase is really short. I know the active shooter that happened at Clackamas Town Center, basically happened in like a one-night period. The person was staying at a friend's house, stole a weapon from their friend, and went and did it the next day, and there wasn't a lot of planning. Some of these have taken a year, and they've planned out multiple different scenarios, situations. The guy that did the Las Vegas shooting had even paid for and scouted out other hotels with other large events. Bought all sorts of weapons, had a very intricate way of getting all the weapons moved into his hotel. So that one obviously took a lot longer, and there might have been more of an opportunity for people to see, like, hey, this is concerning, can we intervene here? Preparation, acquiring stuff. I mean, obviously it's challenging because you can just order stuff on the internet, a lot of it, and it comes to your house and maybe nobody knows. You don't necessarily have to go out to the store anymore, where you might bump into other people. But some of these people do talk about the things that they're buying. They're buying ammo and weapons and things like that. And this isn't somebody that's just hunting in the fall, you know, that has a deer hunting rifle. You know, this is somebody potentially talking about weapons, buying things that they don't necessarily need. They're not in the military. They're not related to law enforcement. They're not target shooters. I know that there's people that really enjoy target shooting and they would never do anything to hurt anyone else. So that by itself would not be concerning. But if I've never been a target shooter and all of a sudden Leo's buying a bunch of weapons and spending lots of time shooting and talking about it constantly, combined with these other things, those are the kind of information we would want you to bring to us and your safety team. The last two, we don't have a whole lot of ability to intervene on the front end. You know, the attack is going to happen, and then that's where we're going to talk today about things that you all can do immediately. And that's where 911 calls and the police coming is appropriate also. Any questions about this? Go ahead in the back.
So I just want to find out that you're saying people a lot, but it's mostly men.
It is mostly white men.
Yeah.
Yep.
I mean, how often do women actually do that?
There have only been one or two that I can think of.
Okay.
Yep. Very often.
We have a question online.
Thank you.
If we see concerning behaviors in others, when is it appropriate to call 911? And do we call the non-emergency number or 911?
Do you call 911 or do you call the non-emergency number, and when is it appropriate to call? Great question. That's all about risk, or at least the answer is all about risk. If you don't make that phone call right now, is somebody going to get hurt? And if the answer is yes, then you definitely call 911. If it's something that may happen in the future or just something that's concerning, then I would call non-emergency. And then I would also potentially talk to your safety team. One of the things we're going to talk with them about is having some plans in place, how to deal with difficult people, how to deal with somebody that comes in here and is causing a disturbance, but they're not an active shooter.
Leo, could you talk about, because those are still very abstract concept, call 911, call non-emergency number. Could we also state something that currently we all know when you call non-emergency number, it's going to take a long time. Good morning, Natasha. I just wanted to clarify because as Judy mentioned, we are a little bit short-staffed these days. So we are fully, we are recognizing when even you call non-emergency number that it might take a little bit longer for an officer to respond to your location. So ideally we would want that, but we also have to be very honest and transparent with you that we know that there might take a little bit of time. So it's always great to maybe talk to Judy and safety team, how can we foster more direct relationships with the precinct so that or district officers or whoever frequently patrols this area, that you have that relationship to, because it's all about human relations, right? Like mechanisms like big platforms, 911 and non-emergency can be usually are absent of that human contact, right? So we also would like to suggest that while we are in this operational crisis, that we are fully committed to serving our community, and especially in the context of most immediate or close to immediate safety needs. We also want you to know that what happens when you file a report about someone, and we are fully acknowledging that this is not an easy task to do, to call a foreign entity and disclose most intimate details about parishioners' life, right? I just wanted to highlight how we, in practice, not just theory, would handle that situation so that you have a better understanding of institutional response to something so complicated and so private and so intimate, and yet has so many risks. So in the past, because of relationships, because of that human contact, we had pastors and imams or leaders of different faiths reach out to us. And we have a safety team, threat assessment team that is comprised of our intelligence unit, officers who work in behavioral health unit with mental health clinicians. So it's a very diverse, comprehensive team. It's not just one discipline reviewing something so complex, because we are no experts in mental health, right? So we had one situation where a faith leader reached out to us and unsure how to, nobody wants to file a police report on a member who is really suffering and hurting, right? And we totally understand that. The reason I mentioned this is to highlight and illustrate how seriously we approach these scenarios and how we are discreetly resolving them, working together with you. So in this one instance, it was a troubled young man who's lost his father in war. It was our refugee family, and now out of necessity in life, he's the breadwinner, jumping through, like, skipping phases in life of necessary development. So all those compounded factors pushed him to get in touch with some online recruitment overseas, right? So the reason I say this is that our healthcare mental health practitioners and police officers met with the person, met with the family, came up with a safety plan, but also, in addition to what you think traditional police response would be, they really applied holistic lens on what other resources, what other organizations and disciplines can play a role to mitigate further risk. So that's how ideally we would approach, should you come to us to talk about a member who is going through divorce and lost a house, or like all those altering life factors that can impact one's rationale to successfully function. So just, I hope that was okay to highlight that, because it can be a foreign concept to like just call 911 or non-emergency. We wanted to walk you through what happens at every step of the way. We work with a faith-based group, right, and share updates, and we connect that person and that family and that community with additional resources, in particular that are very culturally responsive and respectful. So, and we are not experts in that area, so we heavily rely on our community partners and diverse community partners to guide us in areas we just lack that cultural or religious fluency. Thank you. Sorry, Leah.
Nope. Thank you. That was good. And very appropriate. Definitely don't want to minimize how challenging it might be to make a call to authorities about somebody who might be struggling and, you know, showing some of these symptoms, because it is not easy. Most people, after the fact, after an incident's happened, might say, oh yeah, we saw Leo starting to go off the rails, and a lot of people didn't say something. And it's not because they don't care. They couldn't get their mind wrapped around the fact that Leo might actually do something terrible. And it's really challenging to like tell on other people, and you don't want to make it worse. You're always hoping that they're going to be able to navigate with whatever support mechanisms they have in place to get to a place where they are back on track and not a danger and living a healthy life. Go ahead.
Concealed carry.
Mm-hmm.
And what's your thoughts about what their response?
The question is about concealed carry and that response, and we actually have a couple slides toward the end, and so we'll talk about that if you don't mind waiting. We will cover that because I know that's an important topic that comes up frequently, and there's a lot of thoughts on that for and against, and there's a lot of room in the middle there, so we will get to that. It's a great question. Anybody else? All right. We usually want to bring a little levity in at this point. So for perspective, you've probably already done some dangerous things today, like just getting here, whether you walked or drove, right? Getting hit by an asteroid, much more likely. Thankfully, the odds of being involved in an active shooter are really low. So we do want to have the takeaway be a mindset that you can take with you everywhere, right? We know that you're picking up kids from school, you're coming to church, you're going to work, you're at the supermarket, you're at a lot of different places where events like these have happened, you're on vacation, you're traveling, and hopefully all of that is something that might be beneficial to you if you ever were to be in an emergency situation. So this isn't like it's just for this sanctuary right here with this group of people. We know you're involved in a lot of different groups of people. The three things we're going to cover: what to do prior to an active shooter event, and that's organizationally. Like, what do you do? How do you put a plan together? What is the plan going to look like? We're going to talk about what you should do for yourself to keep yourself safe if an event starts but before police get here. And then we're going to talk about what to expect from law enforcement. So, organizationally, first and foremost, and I already mentioned it, you do have support from the top, and that's great. Over the years, probably with more recognition that these events are happening, more awareness of it, more people are willing to talk about it. When we got pushed to do it and provide this information, I think it was 2014, 2015, and there were a lot of groups that didn't want to talk about it, and that caused a lot of frustration in schools and churches and other places. There was always somebody, usually on their safety team, that was like, hey, I think this is a topic that we need to talk about. It's unlikely, but I want to be prepared. And a lot of other people, sometimes even at the top, are like, no, let's not scare everybody. We don't need to talk about it. It's unlikely to happen. Thankfully, it's still very unlikely to happen, but it's really hard to take away the awareness that everyone has, right? And so a lot of times, this is an incident that's very unlikely to happen to you, but a lot of people feel fear about it, and that's totally understandable. And that's why we're here, trying to give you all some information to empower you so that you know wherever you're at, you will be able to take care of yourself. The first thing to do, well, these are the steps we're going to talk about. Create a plan. And a lot of times, this is not going to be a 7-step plan that just sits on a shelf and then you pull it out and start going through it if something were to happen. Because then it might take more than 5 minutes just to get all the dust off the top of it, right? So we're going to talk about training your employees in whatever it is. We talk about run, hide, fight. There are lots of other acronyms people use. There's one called ALICE and there's one called ADD. So we're not at all advocating one over the other. I think all of them have similar steps. I think they're all pretty good. If you've been to one and you thought it was great, or if the safety team wanted to try bringing in ALICE or something else, we're not at all saying don't do that. We do want people to have an idea what to do and train in it and then be able to implement it. And I don't know that it matters which one it is necessarily. And obviously last, we already talked about a little bit, develop some procedures for dealing with people that might make threats, whether they're somebody that comes in off the street or it's somebody that is an active member. Because that can be challenging and that is much more likely to happen. And you may have all experienced that. There's a lot of different churches that have experienced somebody coming in and causing some kind of problem or disturbance. We want churches and houses of worship to be places that people can go when they're struggling, when they're having a hard time, when they're feeling stressed. And there's probably a lot of people here willing to wrap their arms around them, take care of them, show them love, and try to get them back on the right path. So we're not going to talk today about making your houses of worship into Fort Knox, because we know that that's not very welcoming and inviting, right? So the last piece, though, is definitely important and something that the safety team will talk about. One of the first things we say is bring together, not a huge group. There's obviously a lot of downsides to having too many people working on something, but you want a group that's pretty diverse. It's not going to make a whole lot of sense if you don't have anybody with a mindset for safety and all your concern is about the budget. But it also doesn't make sense to have the security people necessarily make the whole plan because it might cost a couple $1 million that you don't have, right? So it's good to bring in people who have the ability to pay for whatever you want to do and implement it. Also the ability to do training. There's been plenty of workplaces that didn't have a huge training budget. A lot of times churches don't have a huge training budget. A lot of times you may not even have people that are interested in doing that. So bring together a group that can accomplish all of those things. You obviously want to include somebody who knows a lot about the building. There's times where we've seen people make a plan and then they don't know which doors lock or where the roof access is and things like that. So you want to have a good, well-rounded group. We want people to know that there's not a one-size-fits-all plan. We've done presentations like this and worked with hotels downtown who are, many, many stories. And there's going to be people, if there ever were to be an event on different floors, who don't even know something's going on. So it's like their plan is going to look much different than, you know, a school that only has one room, or a church that mainly has one large sanctuary. There's also other churches that have multiple campuses and lots of different buildings, and we'll talk about some of that. So most of the plans are all going to look different, and that's totally appropriate. And we're also going to talk about your individual response, depending on where you're at, might be different. One of the first things that we would say, especially to any security team, is to do a site assessment. And we might today, when we're done here, walk through your space. But I would recommend you all doing it at your place of work if you work. Or if you go to other places, maybe you are in your kids' schools a lot, or any other structure or space that you spend time. If you think that there's a potential for something to happen, be thinking about some of the questions that we're going to talk about. Obviously, we would like to do it organizationally also. So maybe your safety team will walk through and try to figure out places to store food or be able to run inside, lock the door, that you'd be safe. But obviously we would do it both, individually and organizationally. If we come and do a site assessment, the main thing we're going to do is ask questions. And we're not going to tell you have to do anything, because there are certainly some things that cost a lot of money that might not be reasonable, and there are other things that might be reasonable. So what kind of violence is possible at your site? Obviously we know that churches and houses of worship can be vulnerable, and I know that that's on everyone's mind. We have done a lot of presentations and worked with a lot of groups that were really unlikely to have any kind of violence there. Small, business with not very many people working there. So if they were to have an event, it's much more likely it would be some type of workplace violence. Very unlikely that it would be a large targeted thing like a mall or a church or a school. How would an active shooter enter and move through your site? These are things that we want you to think about individually and also organizationally, and are there ways to change that? Can you have 1 or 2 doors that are open and accessible where it would funnel people in? Maybe where you would have security, or even people who are ushers greeting people there, as opposed to having all of the exterior doors unlocked. Are there ways to make your site more secure? And we just talked about that a little bit, but there might be a lot of different ways. I know downtown and a lot of businesses have beautiful glass doors and windows, which are awesome, and it lets in a lot of light and it's beautiful, and covering those up or putting something there might not look that great, but there might be other ways to do it with some kind of decorative piece of metal or different things that might make things more secure, less likely somebody could get in a fashion you don't want them to, without making it, like Fort Knox, which is obviously, especially at a house of worship, not going to work. Do you have a way to notify all members if there were some kind of event? And I looked around outside and I looked here. Is there a basement downstairs? It's probably unlikely, if there were ever to be an event here, that everybody here wouldn't know. But think about other places too, where you work, churches, schools, etc. A lot of them that are big enough, you might not have everyone know if there were an event happening in one spot. But you still might want to figure out a way to notify everybody if an event happened, and especially depending on the timing. I don't know if you have multiple services. I know some churches, have 2 morning services on Sunday, and you might want to notify people that would be coming to another service, hey, don't come here, there's something going on. The other thing that might allow you to do is reconnect with everybody if there were to be some kind of event. So is there a way, and we don't tell people how to do it. I know there's apps, there's text groups, there's all sorts of different ways the security groups have come up with ways to connect with people. And maybe it's not relevant, or maybe it's not reasonable. Obviously, churches are open and welcoming. You might have half the people there, you might not know them. You might not be on a first name basis with them. You might not have their information handy like you would if you're an employer. Absolutely.
Just want to mention, actually, we do have a great way. It's like I don't know how many of you have heard it, but we have an AED machine right back there in the narthex. And when you open the cabinet door to that AED, you get a very loud alarm that goes off. So if anybody could right away get to that AED door and open it, we would have a giant alarm going off where people upstairs or anywhere that are in the building would hear. So that's something our team will be talking about.
Very good to know. Very good to know. Think about escape routes. So whether you're, examining your individual space where you work, where you live, or here at church, like how would you get out of here if there was a problem? If somebody came in the door over here and started causing a problem and you needed to leave immediately, obviously there's other ways to get out. And we do want people thinking through that. We're going to talk a little bit about more of the training piece, which is actually going and trying it, making sure that you can get out. We've done presentations like this, and then later been contacted by people who said they were glad we pushed them to actually go make sure and try their exit plan, because some of them tried and they were magnetic doors and they couldn't get them open unless you hit the fire alarm, things like that. So you might run into something that prohibits you from getting out like you think you'd be able to. This may not be totally an option either. How can you account for all of your congregation, all of your members? That might not be something that is possible. Obviously, if it's a morning where a lot of people come that you don't know, but that's one thing we recommend to folks. How do you get people the ability to check back in? And if some of the incidents that have happened, Clackamas Town Center for one, I remember business by business when we're going inside, some there was nobody there, some there was a manager or a boss there. Most of them were even more worried because they didn't know where any of their people were. And there were a few bosses, I remember getting to Sears, and there was a boss in there who was like, handed me a list of paper, and he's like, hey, here's every employee, I've talked to all of them, they're all safe, they're all on their way home. So it was like, he felt better, we felt better, and we moved on to the next store. So that's just something to keep in mind. And it may not be as possible, obviously, in a church setting or a house of worship. Are there places you could store tools, medical supplies, and seek shelter? There may be a situation where if something were to happen back there, and I don't know the layout of your church yet, there might be a great place in here to hide, and it's not an escape. Like it doesn't actually go all the way outside, it's not an exit, but maybe it's a safe, secure place. You could go in there. I can see that that's an inward opening door. Maybe you could put something heavy in front of it. Maybe it locks. Maybe that'd be a great place to go and take safety for a little bit. And we tell people, there's probably much more likelihood of having an earthquake in this town, right, that is big and causes a lot of problems. And so if you were able to put water and a little bit of food in there and potentially some tools, there are different things other than just an active shooter that, it might benefit you for later. Access. So the bottom two questions, the bottom second question is about access. And with the house of worship, it might not be as challenging for law enforcement. Some other places like a school and a hospital, they're locked down into lots of different partitions. And a lot of times there's locked door after locked door, which is good. Gives people an opportunity to get away. Usually keeps out people who are intent on doing harm, or at least slows them down. But it also does slow down law enforcement a little bit. So one of the things we talk about with safety teams, if access is an issue, how can you give access to first responders? I don't know if I would imagine most of you have hard keys here, probably not access cards. I see people shaking their heads, nodding their heads. So just think about access, and is there a way to make it easier for first responders to get in and move around? I know that everybody at Reynolds High School, all the teachers at least, had master keys. And so as we came in and just came across teachers, we were taking their master keys. And so by the end, we were able to very quickly just get everywhere we needed to get. We do have the ability to breach doors and windows if we need to. Obviously, it causes a lot of damage. Sometimes it's slower than just having a key. So we'd always rather have a key or whatever the actual access path is. But we will get through one way or another as quickly as possible. Go ahead.
Do you have access to the Knox box? Because I believe that every church has to have a Knox box.
I believe they do. Yes, we do. And it depends. If that the access piece is hard. This is a small enough structure. I bet nobody would be out there waiting and trying to do the code. They would just figure out a way to get in. But most fire uses it a lot more, but I know police do have access to the code for sure. Yep. Good question.
Fire truck that opens it.
Yes. And sometimes though, even when we go open it, there's no key in there.
Yeah, I've been inspected enough times as AT&T.
Yep, that there is.
We had
Good.
to make sure it was there all the time.
Yep, good. Good question. The bottom question, I don't know how relevant this is for most houses of worship, but do you have a lockout and a lockdown procedure? And that's something that I would have your safety team talk through. I'm going to quickly talk through the difference between a lockout and a lockdown. A lot of houses of worship probably should have a lockout procedure. The difference is a lockout is you're able to just keep doing everything. You're able to keep having a service or whatever's going on in here. You're locking a problem out that's probably not likely to come inside, versus a lockdown. Some schools use lockdown as a response to an active shooter, shut all the classroom doors, get under the table, things like that. And we're going to talk about some of the benefits and some of the downsides to it. So this is for lockout. This is there's a problem out across the street, or somebody's in the parking lot or doing something and you don't want them to come in. They're concerning, but you think you can keep going and have a service as normal. You want to let people know that there's a lockout. You don't want people in here who don't know, and then they, the service is over, or maybe they have to leave early, or they get a call about a family emergency and they have to leave and they don't know there's something. So you would probably tell people, hey, there's a situation going on outside. We don't want people to bump into that. If you're going to leave, go that way. Or none of us can leave right now. There's something going on. We need to just stay in here and be safe. We do want to let people know that. We also need to be able to let everyone know when that's over. And if possible, and this kind of goes back to the way to communicate with your other members. Do you have a way to let people, anybody that might be coming to your space, know, hey, there's something going on outside, either don't come or you're going to need to use a certain door, etc. Lockdown is a little bit different. Like I said, a lot of schools use it. Kids are under desks. They lock the doors. They lock the exterior doors and all the interior doors. Sometimes they cover windows. I've never thought that was super relevant. A lot of times if you're using lockdown because the problem's already inside, so a lot of times covering up windows doesn't necessarily seem like it would make you additionally safe. And if you're on the ground floor, you would potentially want to use that as an exit right away. The call or text 911, we'll talk a little bit more about that later. We only want people doing that if they have relevant information, or if they're one of the first people to make that call. If the police already know that there's a problem and there's police on the way, we don't need everybody calling 911. I know that's happened a lot of times, even in Clackamas Town Center. Thousands of people called 911, overwhelmed the system. A lot of them either had questions, they wanted to know where loved ones were, which is totally understandable, but it wasn't something that was going to help first responders figure out where the problem was or to get people first aid quicker. It just slows the system down. So we always try to remind people, don't call 911 unless you are either have good information that's going to help first responders solve the problem, or you're injured and hiding, because we will prioritize trying to get to people that are injured and hiding. Cell phones, turn them to vibrate. Many of you probably have a ringtone for special people in your life, and so you will a lot of times hear across one of these incidents. I've ran through a couple different schools now in a mall, unfortunately, and a lot of people's phones are going off because people are checking on their loved ones. It totally makes sense. If you are hiding and trying to avoid the person who's doing this incident, you're going to want to turn it all the way to vibrate. We definitely don't recommend turning them off. I know that some people have recommended turning them off just to be quiet. We want you to be as informed as possible. We had probably the best information coming to us in several of these incidents from people who were inside that were communicating on social media and texting. So we don't at all want you to turn them off. That's it about lockdowns and lockouts. Are there any questions on that? I'm assuming that's something that probably your safety team will talk about. I would probably lean towards having some kind of lockout procedure, but lockdown is probably not as appropriate for this space just because of how small it is, and you can't lock it off quite as much as some schools or hospitals. All right, moving on. So one of the things that we want organizations to do is give people an opportunity to do a little bit of practice. And then we're very careful to not say that this presentation is training. I would say that this is information, and then if you put it into practice, you make a plan, and then you actually practice it a few times, that might be training. And if something happened, you would actually be able to get up and go through the motions and do it. The information is good, but if you don't carry that forward, we're hesitant to call it training. What are some of the ways that you all can actually carry this forward? One of the ways is doing a site assessment, actually walking around, which we'll do, and then do some kind of simulating your plan. And there are some safe ways to do it. There's some other ways to do it that we'll talk about. But a tabletop and a drill are probably the two easiest for large groups of folks. You could do a tabletop and just discuss, okay, if you were in the congregation here and something happened at the front door, what would your response be and how would you do it? And just talk through it without actually taking the actions. And those are good, they're quick and easy, and you can change the fact pattern. Okay, now what if somebody came in over here? Because obviously, depending on where you're sitting, that would affect you all differently. And just go through the mental exercise of what you would do, depending on where something happened at. Doing a drill, we actually do want people to get up out of their seats and actually go practice some of those things. And that's sometimes where you might learn, oh, I can't get in or out of this door, or I forgot that that window is 3 stories up because of the way the land lays, and on this side it's street level, on that side it's not. I'm not saying that's how it is here, but some people have at their place of work thought, oh, I would just jump out that window forgetting that that's a 2 or 3 story jump. So with the drills can help work through that. So get up out of your seats, especially if you're downstairs, and figure out what your exits are and actually go use them. And we're going to talk more in a minute about where to go after you would go outside. The bottom on there is a scenario. A lot of people ask us to come and run a scenario for them. A lot of emergency and first responders do use scenario-based training as a way to get their members the best training. There are obviously a lot of downsides to it in an active shooter type scenario. So we have had community groups who are going to run a scenario without all the appropriate safety protocols, which can be really dangerous. If you're going to have somebody with a fake weapon scare people and then try to simulate that and everybody doesn't know that it's not real, there have been some close calls where people who didn't know that it was a drill or a scenario were really going to take lethal action against this person that they thought were actually doing one, and really it was just a training. So we don't recommend doing scenarios unless you have the police involved or somebody that has all of the different safety protocols in place that would need to be there. We think you can meet all of your goals, educating all of your people, and then having some tabletops, and then actually doing some drills. And then if a scenario is something you really want to do or you think is appropriate, then that might be something that you could coordinate with us or some other group who runs scenarios. One of the things that often happens when you start doing tabletops and drills is you realize, oh, my plan wasn't that good, or it had a flaw here and there. So we do recommend make revisions and then have more tabletops and have more drills to figure out what the best course of action would be for you. And one of the things we do need to just keep pointing out is everybody's plan might be different. You know, if the situation happened over there, there might be people over there doing something different than this whole half of the room. And we'll talk more about that. One of the things we talk about with everyone is how soon should you put your plan into place, your individual plan? And that's not always easy to know. If you start hearing loud noises, is that enough to put your plan into action? If you start hearing screaming, if you see somebody that's injured, what we want you all to think through and be ready to do is put your plan into place without having all the puzzle pieces. A lot of times you're not going to know, oh, this is an active shooter or this is something dangerous. A lot of times these calls don't come out as an active shooter for police. They come out as a disturbance, or they come out as a shots fired call. A lot of times the people that are the closest to an incident who know everything about it are not able to make a phone call because their life's in danger and they're running or they're hiding or they're fighting. And so a lot of times you're getting calls from people that are a little bit farther out, the neighbors who can hear something happening and they're not sure what, loud noises, maybe some screaming. And so a lot of times the information you might have is very sparse or inadequate. But we want you to think through, depending on what your plan is, you know, if you're contemplating a 3rd-story jump, I would want more information before I did that. But if my ability on a ground floor just to get away, if I'm hearing a bunch of loud noises that direction, we wouldn't want you to wait and be sure that it was a problem, be sure that it was an active shooter event before you implemented your plan. Some of the places we've gone and worked with, hospitals, were notorious for this. They had the same code for somebody with a weapon as they did for an active shooter. And we were asking them, well, how many times do you encounter somebody with a weapon in your hospital? And they said, well, it's, not frequent, but it's occasional, probably once a month or maybe more, which was surprising to me, but understandable. And I said, what's the most likely or what's the most common response from all the people that work here? And they said, oh, they want to see if they can go help. So they all go to that area and see if they can help. And so you don't want people doing that, right? You want to get people out of there, get them away somewhere else. You don't want to go and make sure that you have a problem. If you think there might be a problem or some kind of event that would put your life in danger, we want you to get away immediately. So the things we're going to talk about, potentially a lockdown, running, hiding, and fighting. And then we're going to talk about rendering aid to the injured. And last, we're going to talk about contacting law enforcement. At some point, if people are really ready for a break, and I haven't given you one yet, then we'll do it. Probably take a break about halfway through, maybe 10 more minutes, if people are good with that. So the first thing we want you all to do is to get away from the area. And obviously, as quickly as you can go. Some people move faster than others, totally understandable. But if something is causing you concern, we want you to go the other direction. We don't want you to just stop outside. If there is a terrible incident happening in here, is going just out to the sidewalk, is that far enough to be safe? Probably not. Should you meet up in places that you've all agreed to ahead of time? Are there any downsides to doing that? Yes, you have people congregated in one spot. There are some really difficult topics to cover in this. Like if you have somebody in a school who does an active shooter and they've done fire drills or other drills and they know where all the people are going to congregate, is that a problem? Yes. Terrible to even think through that, right? But it might be better to have people just leaving, running through the neighborhoods, kids or anybody else who are safe but maybe unaccounted for a little while. So that is a challenge. So don't meet in predetermined locations. What are the upsides? Why do people do that? We've already, accountability, exactly. Bosses, teachers, it's really hard to think about, especially, and obviously this would be age appropriate kids. I'm not talking, younger than that, but accountability is hard. And that's why we do ask safety groups and teams to try to figure out some way to reconnect with everybody afterwards, or a way that you can check in and we can find out. Even if we can find out about most people, there's going to be people that forget, they're scared, they make it home and they forget to call. If we only had 5 people to check on versus 50, that's obviously helpful if we can find out right away that people are safe. We don't want people to feel trapped in a place if there really is an exit they just hadn't thought about, right? So obviously in this, I would not want to break any of these beautiful windows, but if we had to, and if people needed to get out of here, if there was a fire or if there was some kind of incident like this, that might be an option. And obviously a lot of workspaces in schools, it might actually be easier, right? It might be challenging to get one of these and break a window. What would you break a window with in here? I like that. Anything, right? A Bible, a book, something heavy, drumsticks. There are a few chairs up here. Those are all things that we want you to think about ahead of time. And that seems very odd to be recommending that to people. You should be able to come to a house of worship and just have a great Sunday. But hopefully this will be a baseline conversation. And after that, you're just thinking, if I had to get out of here, how would I do it? What would I use? And then you're able just to enjoy the rest of your time. This picture shows a variety of different things, maybe other places to hide, and maybe other ways to get out. So it doesn't necessarily represent one thing. Obviously in here there would be quite a few places to hide, depending on where you're at, and if somebody were to come in and move around, obviously getting away is better. There's lots of different doors I'm seeing, which is good. And obviously some of you probably know more than me about whether these actually exit outside or not. Hopefully you will, after this, if you don't know, you will check it out so that you do know. Are there ways for people in the basement to exit without having to come back up the stairs? Those are all things to know ahead of time. Thinking through like workplace stuff, we already talked about potentially jumping out a window. Hopefully those are things you've thought about ahead of time. And if it was a 1-story drop to get away from something terrible going on inside, that to me seems probably worth it. Obviously, that's not necessarily an option if it's a 3 or 4 or 5-story drop. And so you would have to have a different plan and spend much more time thinking about the hiding piece or the fighting piece that we're going to talk about. We talk about this with police officers, and it's sad that we have to talk about it with other members of our community, but we do want to have in your mind, like, what would stop bullets? Like, what is there that would protect you if something like that were to happen? Can anybody give me an example of something that would stop bullets? Maybe a car, different parts of a car, a really big tree, concrete blocks, sometimes wood will, depending on what type of weapon somebody has. Obviously, the more barriers between you and somebody, the better. You know, if you were up here and you had all these pews in front of you, that would be pretty safe. Concealment is better than nothing. Concealment is something that just blocks you from view. And obviously, if you ended up having to do the hide piece of this, we would want you to be in a space where you were concealed from view so that somebody couldn't even see you, didn't know you were there. If running is not an option, that's always our first recommendation. If running is not an option, maybe you're on a different level and you can't get away, or maybe it happens too quickly, or maybe there's only one exit, and that exit is where the bad thing is happening. We want you to think about hiding. And hopefully, you will have been able to put in some time on the front end to making a better hiding spot, or ways to make yourself safer. Obviously, you can see this lady. Hopefully the door's locked. You actually can't see the lady. Hopefully this door's locked, but she's pushing a copy machine in front of the door. You can tell by the closer here that it's an inward opening door, so somebody could push on it. There's pluses and minuses to both types of construction. There's outward opening doors that you would pull out into a hallway, or ones where the door would go into the room you're trying to go into. Like this would be an inward opening door, and it would be easier for you all to put stuff behind it and block it from opening. One of the things we're always trying to reiterate to people, don't just hide and stay there. Be thinking about ways to make yourself safer. Maybe you initially hide, maybe you're in there and you remember, oh, there's an exit out of here, or this window is here. Now I've locked the door, I've barricaded it. I could hide in here. I'm not really hearing anything anymore. Maybe now is the time to break the window and try to escape. Or maybe you even leave your room of safety if you're not hearing anything, but you know that right in front of the door is another exit to get outside. So if you were ever to be in this position, which hopefully you will not be, and most likely you will not be, we do want you to just keep on thinking, is there something else I could do to make myself safer? Obviously, silence your cell phone. As you can see there, people piled up chairs and tables and desks and stuff. They've taught kids in schools to do that, which is sad that they have to do that. But it can keep you safer. I know that when we were going into Reynolds, room to room, it was different. Some of them, they all had locked doors, which was good. I know Portland Public Schools have the doors locked and propped, and so if something happens, they just move the prop and they shut. They're locked. They're solid wood doors. But having the added protection, potentially, of having tables and chairs stacked up there might be something that's beneficial. Some people have brought up the idea that, well, as you can see, there's a window in the door, and if the suspect were to come and see through the window the tables and chairs, when they know that there's people in there. And that is a concern, but what we haven't really seen is suspects being willing to fight through stuff like that. Most likely they're going to realize, oh, this is going to be a more fortified room, more challenging to get into, and they're going to move on somewhere else. We haven't seen any of these types of incidents where somebody spent a lot of time trying to get in somewhere. So I would probably lean towards the benefit of using some tables, chairs, whatever you have to barricade. If they were to make it through all that, it would be much more beneficial to, if you had to fight the person, to have them having to climb over and fight through tables and chairs first, while they're not able to just directly come in and impact you, if that makes sense. So we lean towards recommending to people to use some barricading techniques like that. And last but not least, we've talked about running, we've talked about hiding. What's last? Fighting. And there's actually 3 options. Some of them are better than others. The first one obviously is to fight, and we're going to talk about that. Freezing is another option, right? And under pressure with no training, it's a very normal thing for people under stress to just freeze, right? So that's a very normal thing. Obviously, one of the reasons we're here, getting our minds wrapped around the topic, if we haven't already done it, and then hopefully with some tabletops and some drilling, we would keep anybody from freezing in that situation. And the last is negotiating, trying to talk to the person. The benefits of fighting, it is probably statistically your best chance of saving your life. Most of these incidents immediately change as soon as somebody takes some kind of action. A lot of times people who do these incidents are not wanting it to end with them either getting taken into custody or getting injured or incapacitated right there. And a lot of times they will do something else. They'll quit, they'll try to flee, they'll take their own life, one of those things. There's also the likelihood that you're successful. You incapacitate them or you disarm them, which has happened on multiple events. And it doesn't mean that you're going to be necessarily safe. It doesn't mean that somebody isn't going to get injured that's trying to overpower this person, incapacitate them, disarm them. But that is probably your best choice, especially if there's not a lot of places to go. If somebody comes into a small room, there's not a lot of exits, and there's not really anywhere to hide, fighting, especially if you have a group of people, is by far your best option. We do know that it will probably create additional time for police to get there. A lot of times they will take some other course of action and, like I said, try to leave, run, flee, surrender, or take their own life. Freezing, there's almost no benefits. There have been multiple incidents where people did freeze and that didn't stop the person from trying to injure or kill them. And so obviously it's not something we recommend, and it's not usually a conscious choice. It's usually done by people who are just overwhelmed. It's a very understandable response, and we're hoping with all of this, plus additional training and practice, to have people that wouldn't freeze in that moment, and they would take steps to protect themselves. Negotiating is really challenging. We have not seen very many successful negotiations. There have been 1 or 2 across the country where somebody was successful in talking somebody out of injuring or killing them. But you have to imagine the people who are willing to do an event like this are not in the frame of mind where reason and logic and empathy and sympathy is going to work on them. And there have been several times where people did try that, even here in Oregon at the Umpqua Community College shooting. There were people who tried talking to them and told them things that would be very compelling to anybody in the right state of mind, and that didn't help them, and they still continued on doing what they were doing. So it's not something we recommend. We say all that not to scare you, just to give you some perspective and kind of motivate people like, okay, I do not want to have to come to church or any house of worship or school or the mall and think about having to fight as my best option. But if that is your best option, and everybody can agree on that, then we can just focus on that and know that that's something we might need to do. If you were in this situation, we want you to commit to the fight and do whatever it takes to overpower this person or disarm them. You're not going to get in trouble from law enforcement. If it is an active shooter type person that's actively trying to injure or kill other people, you're not going to get in trouble. We want you to think about using improvised weapons. Right, we'll talk about concealed carry and things like that in a little bit, but most likely that's not going to be the case, right? We're going to have books, we're going to have coffee pots, we're going to have backpacks, fire extinguishers, exactly. I think you see some of that in this next photo. Everybody in this room is doing something to try to distract and disorient this person and physically incapacitate them, and that would be very overwhelming. We talked earlier during the statistic piece, how often is it a one-person type incident, one suspect? 98% of the time. So it's unlikely you're going to have to ever do that in general, but it's even less likely you would ever have to do that with 2 people. So anybody, no matter how strong, how big, how they were armed, they would have a hard time fighting through all of that, right? And that's what we want to see. All right. People want to take a break or just keep on going? All right, people are saying let's take a break. It's, what time is it? It's 1 o'clock. How about 1:10? We'll start again at 1:10. Awesome.
Can I amend my statement? Of course. No, and it's a cisgender white man, is I should say. Yeah.
seems like we were all smart, but it became, they became desensitized. Like, you know, the kids are fooling around, playing, I mean, they really does, I mean, you have to do the drills, and you have to, and it's good to have the police, so that, I think.
My kid is 15 now. It's perfect. Yeah. They probably across the street with a guy came and left. It's not even an ongoing thing. Inappropriate, and they're still trying to do the best they can. It's like,
Well, the reason, you know, when we do a lockdown, we just locked all of the doors and we just continue this. Unless there's something threatening. Still, it is.
you said about
Hi Cheryl, nice to meet you. I've seen you attending, but I'm usually up there on the drums, I thought that. So, good to see you. I'm writing down people who are here, so I jump on the. What is your last name? Okay, M-O-R-E, that's easy. I'm glad you stayed. You've been coming too. Have you been thinking about money at all? Oh, that's great. All right. Cheryl, C-H? Yes.
They've had a, you know, it's all electronic too. Is this for real? It's a girl, okay?
Yeah, I usually most because I was kind of interested.
Right.
And there's a lot of different ways to understand it's a creative,
I appreciate that.
artistic piece.
I'll give them the 1 minute. Or the 2 minute.
This is huge. So,
All right, we'll start again in 2 minutes.
100 people in this party.
Go slow and long, so falls afterwards.
So, we just brought, I brought 11 this morning. So, so you reflected what that means in this particular
start going again? All right, we'll move on. Next thing we're going to talk about is rendering aid to anyone that's injured. That's obviously, people know where that picture came from? Boston bombing, yes, exactly. And it's not an active shooter. Does anybody have an idea why we put that photo in there?
Show someone giving aid.
Exactly. Who were the first responders in that situation? It was all the people at the race, right? It wasn't even cops and firefighters and medics. It was community members who jumped in and helped save a lot of lives and save a lot of limbs. There were, I think, 16 amputations, if I remember right, and only 3 deaths. There were a lot of tourniquets put on people that day, and a lot of different things happened that were really good. And so we do want to talk about that. It's obviously something that we want to think about. And obviously it's much more likely that any medical aid, medical training is going to be used because of a car crash or something else, not just an active shooter. So we ask people, do you know how to stop major bleeding? And some of you do, and that's great. A lot of places don't. Do you regularly train on that, or do you get first aid CPR through the church or personally or work? Sir, awesome. Community?
Personal emergency response team.
Community emergency response team. I saw some of them out yesterday at the parade. And what did you?
It was training that I took for a personal situation.
Personal, gotcha, great. So kind of different levels of training, and I know, like I said earlier, a lot of houses of worship don't have a huge budget for training. But if there is any money, or maybe there are volunteers, or maybe there are groups that you could coordinate with. I know there's one, somebody might write down Stop the Bleed. That is a local, it's a national effort, but it's usually ran locally through the hospitals. Coordinate with them, and they will show people how to stop major bleeding if you don't already know. Teach people how to put on tourniquets and how to do wound packing, things like that. And that's obviously something that's kind of come back into focus, like tourniquets. I know after even the Vietnam War, tourniquets were kind of out. People thought that they did a lot of damage and they were more likely to lose a limb, and so people didn't do them. In 2014, after an active shooter event, a bunch of doctors got together. It's called the Hartford Consensus, and they did a bunch of research on it, and they recommended for law enforcement and first responders in general to start using tourniquets and wound packing. And even here in the city of Portland, we've probably, since 2014, had officers put about 200 tourniquets on people. A few car crashes and other things, mostly gunshot victims. And it's been, I would say, in large part, a big success. A lot of the injuries are not life-threatening. And so you're putting them on anyway in case they are. You know, the police officers out there are not trauma surgeons. They don't know if it's, you know, a life-threatening injury or not. But if there's massive bleeding from an extremity, they put a tourniquet on. And there's probably about 25% of the time the surgeons later say if the person hadn't gotten the tourniquet, they would have died. Some of these major artery bleeding, you can, not always, but depending on if it's completely severed, there sometimes are 3 to 4 minutes where somebody could bleed out. So tourniquets are something that we recommend learning about and maybe having in your kits. Stop the Bleed is probably the best local contact through the hospitals to try and get some training on that. And the odds of an active shooter being the need for a tourniquet are pretty low. There's probably a variety of other things. I know we've had people get run over by a dump truck and having amputation. We've had compound fractures that police officers have used those on. And so they're obviously something that if you're out hiking or biking, I know people who have been mountain biking out in the woods and had an accident and put something, you know, impaled their leg or arm. So there's a lot of different things that it'd be worth knowing how to use it and then having one with you if you're way outdoors. Is there an ability to get more training? That's probably something that your safety team will talk over and where to get it from. If you already have training, you know, is that person who's there, do they have other things that they could teach you or talk about that maybe you hadn't thought about? We talk about medical kits. Where are they? Hopefully you all know. Hopefully you have some. Is what's in them worth having in there? A lot of times we'll walk around through a site assessment, we'll open those up, and there's like some Band-Aid wrappers and nothing else. That's pretty common. And obviously in a life and death situation, Band-Aids may not be what you're looking for anyway, and they might not have been sticky in the last 20 years. So worth looking through, opening up, seeing what's in there, making sure that it's what you want to be there, and then having everybody know where it is. And probably having more than one. There should probably be a couple downstairs and a couple up here, and maybe in a couple in different spots, maybe one upstairs. When we talk about rendering aid, just like in the Boston Marathon, they didn't know if that was an ongoing event or just a single explosion, and obviously people jumped into action and started saving other people's lives right away, and that's great. Most active shooter incidents, it does take a while for the police to get there, stop the shooter, figure out if they're down, also escaped, whatever it might be, and then start rendering aid. And if you're in that situation, it might feel like a long time, even if it's only 5 minutes. There were people in Clackamas Town Center who were hiding in a closet, and some of them were in there for a long time, several hours, as we were working through trying to get to everybody. And obviously we prioritize any of the places where somebody would be injured, or if we find out, hey, there's somebody injured in room 210, we're gonna go there first if we don't have any other information. But if you happen to be in there with them, we would want people to start rendering aid right away. And that includes rendering aid on yourself, because you may run in, hide somewhere, and you potentially could be injured, we don't know. And so we want you to be able to do medical care for yourself. There have been some very disappointed people in an active shooter event feeling like, okay, the cavalry's here, the police are running in the door, it's like, hey, I need your help, the shooter's not down yet, and the police just go running on by. Right? So we do want people to know that the police's priority initially is to stop whoever is hurting people and making more injured people. That's always going to be their focus, especially if you are there and able to do any first aid. We would want you to just keep on doing it. And the sooner that we can get that entire situation, the safety part of it resolved, then we will immediately transition and start working on the medical side of it. We've talked about this. There's obviously a lot of different places that the medical and even some of the mindset piece could be used. Traveling, vacation, school, houses of worship. It's not just here in this building here. So we want you to take away the mindset that can be applied everywhere, not just here in this house of worship. As far as what to say to 911 and do you even call them, we've talked about it a little bit. If you have any of these things, if you have the location of the suspect, we definitely want to hear from you. If you know the shooter's description, we definitely want to hear from you. And if you know anything about weapons that they may have, we would want to hear from you. And also if you were to know about a number of victims, like say, at a school or at a movie theater. If there was a specific theater where an event happened and there was a bunch of injured people in one room, we'd want to know about that because we would definitely prioritize that. If you don't know any of that information and you are just hiding somewhere, we would recommend not calling 911 unless you aren't sure that other people are already calling. If you had a whole bunch of people in one room and everybody ran and you knew lots of people were calling 911 and you didn't have the information, that's when we would say, hey, either don't call 911 or just wait, maybe text a loved one. Texting uses up a lot less bandwidth than making phone calls. So we would say text your loved ones. You can actually text 911 also, which is now great. Everybody had it seemed like before we did, but even Multnomah County's BOEC, you can text them. We've covered most of that, maybe the bottom one. If you're a witness and you're uninjured, or if you have information, you might be there for a while. The police might need your help. A lot of times we will try to put people on buses, keep them safe and comfortable, or we'll just get them out of there, get their phone number, and be able to contact them later if it's not something immediate information that we need from them. Officers, if they were arriving, if there were an incident, they probably would be asking for, do you have a way to account for everybody? And if you don't, that's understandable. Just know that that question might be coming. They would obviously ask for access. So whether you're here or school or work, and there were to be some kind of incident, first responders would be asking for some way to gain access, whether it's a key card or a key or whatever it might be. I don't know, I didn't see any cameras anywhere other than the ones that are up here and on me. If you have surveillance cameras, which is becoming more and more common, and that's great. We've even had incidents happen at places where they were able to give us the IP address and we could just log in and see the cameras right away, which is helpful. If there is like an old school security camera room and there's somebody in there monitoring the cameras, we would obviously want to get an officer to that spot quickly. And that's happened definitely at local malls and other places like that that still have that. And just a reminder, hopefully these things get worked out ahead of time after this presentation here, safety team meets, and you get a lot of this stuff in place, if you're going to get it in place, long before anything ever were to happen, even though thankfully that's very unlikely. So if you were to be involved in an event somewhere, what's it going to be like to be contacted by law enforcement? We would ask people to, if possible, obey instructions. If cops are coming and asking you to stop or get down, try to do it. Try to have your hands free. What is almost everybody going to have in their hands? Cell phone, right? Totally understandable. We're not expecting people to drop their cell phone. I know that when we initially, like in 1999, started teaching police officers how to do an active shooter response after the Columbine school shooting, one of the things we told them was to search everybody that was leaving in case they were one of the suspects. And that might be something that is feasible in a really small environment, but we interviewed the first Clackamas County deputy who arrived at the Clackamas Town Center shooting, and he said that was one of the first things he remembered from his training. He's like, I'm supposed to search all these people? There's 1,000 people running out of the mall. So the police are going to be expecting wherever the bad thing's happening is where the people are running from. So they're probably not going to be stopping and talking to you. They're not going to be worried about what's in your hand. They're going to be going to wherever you're leaving, if that makes sense. A lot of people are surprised that cops might run by them. If you do have critical info, you might have to go grab a cop and tell them like, hey, I saw something or I know something, in order to stop them, because they're just going to be going in and going to try to find the problem as quickly as possible. One of the things that we've come across and that has become a topic is, if you're hiding, should you open the door if someone says they're a cop? And it's probably more complicated than it sounds, because obviously if there's a cop outside, you would probably be safe to open the door. But what if it's not a cop? There have been incidents where the active shooter has gone around and knocked on doors, and in a few very rare instances even worn like a police shirt and a police hat and said it's safe to come out. So we don't recommend opening the door, at least for the first 15 to 20 minutes. Let the police open the door. So for the most part, we are going to knock on the door. We're going to say it's the police. You probably don't even need to reply. And then we'll tell you, hey, we're going to open the door, and hopefully not surprise you. Because what do we want to find inside? We want to find you all hiding and you all ready to fight. Right? So we're going to tell you ahead of time, hey, I'm going to open the door in case you're standing there with a fire extinguisher, ready to smash me, which is a good thing. We do want you prepared to do that. But when we come knock on the door, I've had some pretty funny interactions. Obviously, active shooter events are not funny, but they happen quickly. I left wearing just normal clothes, get to Clackamas Town Center and Reynolds both, and you're knocking on doors saying, hey, it's the police. And there's people saying, I don't believe you're the police, slide your badge under the door. It's like, well, I left in a hurry, I didn't have a badge with me. So there are things that you can do to try to figure out if it's the police. And that's one of the reasons we talked earlier about having your cell phone on. We do want you monitoring, the information that you're getting. And a lot of times you might know before we know that somebody is down, like the suspect is down or the suspect is left. And so we do want you to monitor that. And it's like, if it's been 15, 20, 30 minutes, that is probably a window of time where there still could be a suspect in there. But the farther away from like 15 minutes you get, the more unlikely it is. So if you're hiding somewhere for an hour and then somebody knocks on the door, the odds of it being the police are really high. If you can hear more than one voice, the odds are it's probably the police. If you can hear a voice in a police radio, it's probably the police, right? And that probably should all start making you feel better about like, okay, maybe they're opening the door. When the door does open, it really is the police and not a suspect. Any questions on that? The whole point of that is, if somebody knocks on the door in the first 5, 10, 15, 20 minutes, stay silent, stay hidden, stay ready to fight. And if it really is the police, they'll open the door and they'll come in and talk to you. The last bullet point there, I don't know that I covered it well enough. At some point, if 15, 20, 30 minutes go by and you haven't heard from the police, feel free to call and text. Like a lot of times by then, the suspect has definitely been dealt with, and we do want to start coming and getting people as quickly as possible, and we will prioritize rooms where we know people are hiding. So if it's been 30 minutes and you haven't had the police come into your room, then definitely either give us a call or a text after that period of time. Go ahead.
Once we have our safety plan and we establish hiding places in case those are needed to be used on different floors, is it a good idea to communicate that with maybe our community police officer of where our hiding places are?
Great question. Should you let the police know where your hiding places are? Yes, in general. And if you have interactions with police officers, hopefully we will have a connection. I know that there's a program that we're trying to work on called One Cop, One Church. Hopefully each house of worship would have a person that they're connected with, and that would be a great person to have them come through and know all the ins and outs. With a structure this small, you would have police officers in every room within just a few minutes, so it would be much less, it wouldn't take hours and hours like the mall or something that's huge, but that is a good question. Still a very good idea if you have a police officer you have contact with to have them, let them know where those places are. All right, on to a topic, obviously a dicey topic. I haven't gotten myself in too much trouble, although there's a lot of emotions around should people carry concealed, what happens if people respond, all of that. So hopefully we will have a great conversation about it. Almost every time we have ever done one of these, somebody, and I'm not accusing anybody in here, almost every time somebody comes up and tells me, oh, I carry armed. So like it's a very common thing. Even I did the city of Portland, I did downtown, City Hall, did 17 sessions in order to get everybody in the building. And almost every single session, even though it's totally against the rules, somebody came and told me, I do every day because I'm worried about somebody coming in here and doing something terrible. So I know it's a topic that we need to talk about. Yeah, some people have said, hey, we don't want to talk about this. It's against the rules in our location, our house of worship, our place of business. Totally get that. But I do think there's, a lot of different things in this one complicated situation worth talking about. So we talk with people that might be armed. Like, what do you do if you're armed? And a lot of times people think, oh, I'm going to go save the day. And it's like, that has happened. That's definitely happened. But it's also gone the other way, right? So it's much more complicated than that. How can you make the situation better is something that we ask them. And some of them say, save the day. But we also make a point, you might just take people in a room and keep that room safe. And that would still be making the situation better. I know that if I had loved ones at Clackamas Town Center, I would have wanted them in the jewelry store where the security guard was with a gun. He didn't know if it was a real incident or a scenario. He ended up pulling his gun out. He's kind of looking down the mall and he's not sure. And so he ended up reholstering. He went into this jewelry store and had like 10 people in there and just said, hey, I'm a security guard, I have a gun. If the guy comes in here, I'll keep you guys safe. I think that's making the situation better. And he didn't try to go and make some heroic attempt, but it's still better, right? There are obviously different ways that you could make the situation worse. What are some of those ways? Hit the wrong people. All of those are challenging, right? And even on a much lower scale, I talk about the same security guard. Because in that same moment where he pulled his gun out and he's trying to figure out what to do, and then he reholsters, somebody saw him with his gun out. And so then we got another call of another guy with a gun with his description. So we thought we were chasing two shooters, which is very unlikely. And they both really did have guns. So in some ways he made the situation better, but he could have done better in this one moment and not pulled his gun out and been seen by other people who then called him in as another suspect. We try to hit home with people to stay within your individual skills and your capabilities. A lot of times if you are going to carry a firearm for protection, it's going to be concealed. And so that means it's small, doesn't have a lot of ammo, probably isn't super powerful, and is not what you want to have in any kind of gunfight. And that's usually not something that people are able to shoot long distances with. So it's like if you have some tiny little pistol for personal protection in case you get robbed or something up close, do you want to try to shoot 50 yards down the way? Probably not. But if you train for that all the time, maybe that is something that you are capable of. So stay within your own individual and your weapons capabilities. We really push that with all of our police officers also, because a lot of them carry armed when they're off duty. But it's not necessarily their job or what they should do based on their skill and what they're carrying to try to go and intervene right away, depending on what they have. Obviously, you could be mistaken as another shooter. We do recommend to our police officers and anybody that carries concealed to keep it concealed as long as possible. Unless you absolutely need it, don't pull it out. That security guard probably reacted instinctively. Oh, there's a deadly force threat, pulls it out, doesn't actually need it, reholsters, and just in that time, somebody saw him, reported him as another shooter. Would have been much better if he hadn't pulled it out. It obviously wasn't close enough. He didn't need it right away. And so we tell people, if you don't need it, don't pull it out. And if you do pull it out and you do use it, hopefully you're successful, and then put it away as quickly as possible. There's been obviously very challenging interactions with police and community members who have done the right thing, stopped an active shooter, and then either were mistaken as a active shooter or just really had a tense interaction with the police, because the police are not a lot of times getting information quickly enough as they run through a building, a mall, a school, and all of a sudden they're confronted with somebody with a weapon. So if you were to carry concealed, or if you were to disarm somebody, be of the mindset, hey, the police aren't going to know that I'm not the suspect, and be ready to drop it, put it down, conceal it as quickly as possible. Obviously, we recommend to people, if you are concealed, or if you're an off-duty officer or security guard and you plan to take action or you're armed, we do want you to call 911 if possible and try to get us that information, and try to let us know where you are at, try to let us know your description, and then what your plan is. And that security guard did that day, and that actually helped us. He said, hey, I have a gun, I'm a security guard, and I'm in the back of this jewelry store, and I got a bunch of people in here, I'm going to keep them safe. And that helps us, right? Do you think we're going to go there first or last? Last. Everybody in there is safer than everyone else, so that helps make the situation better also by letting us know. And then obviously when we do get to that last room, it is nice to know somebody in there has a weapon, right? And we're going to have to work through that. Any questions about the carrying concealed or armed piece? Obviously, we don't recommend for people to do it, and we don't recommend people not to do it. What we recommend is, if you are going to do it, you need to train, and you need to know and understand all of the different possibilities and responsibilities that are on your shoulders, because most often the risk is probably much higher of something negative happening, not being the hero, not helping. But they're certainly not zero. There have been plenty of circumstances where somebody did take action and it worked out better and they did save lives. So, complicated issue, not at all a clear cut, one way is better than the other. But if people stay within their own capabilities and their weapons capabilities, we'll be better off. Switching gears, so talking a little more kind of globally just about an event. There's a potential. Some events will garner a lot of attention. The Umpqua Community College event, at some point within like 2 days, they had media from like every country in the world camped around there. Every hotel was full. There were people making phone calls and trying to get through to people that worked at the college, through different routes, trying to contact their children and their loved ones and get information. And they used some tricky routes, and like, hey, I heard that, this one person's name got hurt, when they knew it wasn't that person. Like, no, it wasn't that person, it was this person, trying to get extra info that shouldn't have been out there. We want people to know that that is something that we're going to be trying to work through. And obviously, wherever that event happens, we want people to know not to give out information, not to feel pressure to share anything, and know that it's going to be potentially overwhelming with how many people are interested in it and want to know about it and are trying to pry into it. Obviously, there are occasionally very delicate conversations that need to happen about what you're going to do with that space or structure. I know that even in Texas, there were conversations about tearing it down, rebuilding something else. There's usually someone that feels like they want to leave it as a memorial. Thank you all for being here. And I don't know that there's a right answer, but obviously that's something that each community would have to work through, and it would be challenging trying to figure out what to do. And if you're going to use it again and get back up and running, whether it's the mall or a church or a school, how do you do it, right? And there are a lot of different community resources, counseling, and things to help figure out how do you reopen something where something like that's happened. But that's something that does get worked out, unfortunately, one way or another. All right, we're almost to the end. Like I said at the very beginning, this isn't training, this is just information today. Hopefully you will take it and do something with it that ends up allowing anybody who is in a situation like that to be able to take action. I hope that we did it in a way that gives you some perspective, because it really is very unlikely that anything like that will ever happen to anyone in here. And we're happy about that. Sad that we have to talk about it at all. Obviously it's on someone's mind, and I know that there is a lot of reason behind trying to get the information and feel empowered so that you can take care of yourself and your loved ones if something were to happen. We do want you to put together your own personal plan, and that isn't going to be a written out plan. That hopefully is going to be the run, hide, fight. You take it everywhere with you, and you, first and foremost, if something were to happen, what do we want you to do? Very first thing we want you to do is run and get away, right? And that's hopefully easy to remember and easy to implement. If something is happening and it sounds terrible, just get away. If you can't get away, what do we want you to do? Hide. Last but not least, if there's no time to run and no place to hide, fight. Be ready to do it, hopefully with a group of people. Think about improvised weapons and things like that. Commit to the fight, and that will keep you safe. Obviously, the time to implement your plan is as soon as you think something is happening. Don't wait. And obviously, the time for the safety group and your congregation to work on that is right now, so that you don't have something happen and you're not prepared. That is everything I have. Are there any questions that didn't get asked throughout this presentation so far? Go ahead.
Is an elevator a good place for people to potentially hide?
That is a good question. I would say, well, first off, my answer is always it depends. It's an easy answer because it does always depend. It depends where it went. It depends if you could lock the doors. If you were in an elevator and the doors were locked and nobody could get into it, that might be a good place to hide. Is that an escape route for other people, though, that you're then blocking? Like maybe they need to get away and the elevator is the best place. I don't know. So there's a lot of things to work into that. It'd probably be a case-by-case basis on whether or not that is a good option. Do you have an elevator here? Okay. You go one floor or two? Three. Okay. So I would, as a group, or if you have that question, I mean, I would try to figure out, can I lock the doors if I'm in there? Is there a better exit that I could go out? Depending on which level you're at, and it could be a good option depending on where you're at. It's a good question. Any other questions? All right. I'll stick around for a little bit. There's always questions that people want to come up and ask afterwards. And then I think some of us are going to do a walkthrough. So thank you all. We're always a resource for you. You can always, through Judy, get a hold of us either by email or phone call. And don't hesitate to reach out. And I hope you have a wonderful rest of your Sunday. I hear the sun shining outside. I don't know that. It could probably raining. All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Keep those handouts if you want them. If you don't, just pass it forward.